We've got the goblin drill, and it tunnels towards the tower a third slower than the miner does. It spawns a goblin every 3 seconds for a total of 9 seconds. And then on death, it spawns 3 more goblins. Left ignored, that's gonna destroy the princess tower, but no one really leaves the card alone. So every 3 seconds, it'll spawn a goblin for a total of 4 goblins, plus the 3 goblin death spawn. It decays 133 health per second, so it just goes down really, really fast. This means if you're defending against the giant or anything else, you don't want to put it down until the last second just to preserve the health timer of it. But it does protect against the giant really, really well. And every other building targeter, I mean, if there's no log or anything to take out those goblins, a giant's done. It's an epic card. That means with 1 epic book of cards and 1 book of books and a full stack of epic cards means you will be able to max it out on the first day it releases in the challenge. 67 spawn damage, 21 crown damage. It does take a little bit longer. If you mistime it, it's not going to get all the skeletons that you targeted. So you got to time it a little bit earlier. It's got a 2-tile radius of damage. And it knocks. And on top of all of that, it knocks units back 1 tile. It's completely interrupted that bandit's dash. This will work on Ram Rider, Battle Ram, and everything else, and it pushes them back 1 tile. It's completely stopping that Ram Rider. It can knock back the Battle Ram. So sometimes it depends on the unit, but it may or may not be worth it to drill on top of the units. It's only 67 damage on the barbarians, and it's just going to barely stop them. That barbarian's not going to connect. It might be more worthwhile just to drill in the middle, just so that it pulls between both towers and just gives the barbarians time to take it all out. The goblins always spawn on the top in the front of the drill, so if you place it in the back, it might not get all the damage compared to if you place a goblin drill in the front or on the side. So on the left side, the goblins had to walk that distance, so they died a little bit faster without getting all the full stabs in. Whereas on the right side, I was able to get all the goblins spawning, and it just takes out the tower. It's a little bit more damage. This is where it gets complicated. Have you ever played with your friend and both you and your friend are playing on the bottom player? The truth is, one of the players is the top, so that's true red. The game mirrors that. So there's always going to be slight interaction changes. The goblin drill is 2x2, so it's like a Tesla. So if you put it perfectly in the center, it's going to spawn left or right. If you're true blue, it's going to spawn on the left side. And the goblins are going to trickle to the left. This includes all the goblins that spawned. They're going to trickle to the left as well. Now, if you're true red, the goblins are going to trickle to the right side. This is more interesting to note to counter Inferno Towers and stuff like that. But if you're tanking with a Hog Rider or something like that, that left Princess Tower is still going to take out the Goblins. So you're better off just putting the Goblin Drill on top of the tower. If you initiate the battle, then you're true blue and everything's going to spawn on the left. If you accept the battle from your friend, you're going to be true red and everything's going to go to the right side.
But Oj, I play ladder and I don't know if I'm true red or blue.
Right off the bat, you will know. If your finger is on the left side, it's going to spawn on the left side. And if your finger's on the right side, then it's going to spawn on the right side. So knowing all the basic mechanics, you're probably not going to want to knock back a giant. You're going to want to pull it into the center so that both towers can get rid of it. It's going to slowly trickle in, and you can spawn at least 3 goblins, plus the death damage of the 3 other goblins is completely wiping that out. For a Hog Rider, you're going to have to use a Tesla placement. You're going to have to stagger it a little bit to the left and probably a little bit earlier just because of the slow deploy time. It will counter the Hog Rider, but it's very close. Or honestly, you could just put it on top of the Hog Rider, knock it backwards a little bit, and this placement pushed it to the side, so it's the same result. But if you knock it backwards and have the goblins spawn in front of it, that Hog Rider is going to die a little bit faster. Royal Hogs are a tough one. They're a little bit faster. You do have to bring the Goblin Drill a little bit closer just so that you get all of the goblins. They will get some damage in the tower. With that placement, it's about 500 damage. It's almost better to knock back the piglets and deal that 67 spawn damage and have the goblins just spawn directly on top. This is going to prevent a lot more damage from being done to your tower. For the Royal Giant, you're going to want to treat it like a goblin cage. You're going to want to put the drill on top of it just so that the goblins spawn immediately on top of the Royal Giant. If you do it just in time, that Royal Giant won't get any hits. It's pretty hard though. The Royal Giant almost always gets 1 hit. As soon as you see the Royal Giant, you have to put down that Goblin Drill as soon as possible, just so that it gives the goblins time to stab it. It can stop the golem as well. You're going to want to place the drill 4 tiles from the river and 3 tiles from the Princess Tower. It can stop the golem's death damage, but it's going to be a very tight placement and timing for this. With the goblin spawning, it just barely stops the death damage. Any later and the golem will have connected. Unsurprisingly, the Electro Giant is going to be one of the few ground building targeting units that it does not stop, just because it destroys the goblins. Even when the goblin drill spawns 3 goblins, it's still not enough. It brings down the Electro Giant down to 10% health, but it's still going to connect. As for the air troops, there's no way it's going to stop a Lava Hound. It has no health. The spawn decay is insanely fast. That was the worst 4 elixir of my life. The goblins barely even got 100 damage on their tower. Can it stop a balloon? Not really. It can absorb 1 shot, and then it's going to connect to the tower, and that's going to be some big ouchies right there. Just barely 1 hit, though. Strictly in terms of just tanking the balloon, though, a better position might be to pull the balloon back just a little bit on top of it, just so that it can tank 2 total shots from the balloon, or at least delay that second shot. It's still going to get 1 hit on the tower, but it's going to be a lot less tighter. Just like the Goblin Cage, it doesn't matter where you place it. It's going to pop the Skeleton Barrel. You place it on top, Skeleton Barrel still going to pop. Goblins are going to kind of take it out. It does deal 67 damage, though, so that is exactly enough to take out the skeletons. You're going to want to play it a little bit earlier. So if you watch my Versal video, you'll realize that there's almost no way to defend the Goblin Drill. You have to predict where it is. And even then, that Stabby Goblin still got over 500 damage in the tower against my Battle Healer. Single target units just don't really counter it very well. The rough part is you don't know where it is, and if you try and predict it in the front and they spawn it in the back, that's the exact same thing. That's even worse. That's more damage because you didn't place the Battle Healer on top of it. At the end of the day, you're going to want to wait for it to spawn so you can place units directly below it, because the goblins spawn on the bottom, and this completely tanks it. As a single targeting unit, Giant Skeleton conveniently one-shots them and only got 200 damage on the tower. The hardest one to defend is when they put it right on the front there, unless you have a splasher like a Royal Ghost or something like that conveniently also one-shots them. That's still 300 damage. Even with a melee splasher, it gets guaranteed 200 to 300 damage. Valkyrie's going to be one of the best counters. The worst part is that it's so slow. You don't know when it's going to split until it's too late. And then when it pops up, that's when you can put it down. You can't really predict it. Oh, 500 damage, even with a Valkyrie. Royal Ghost, Valkyrie, Dark Prince. These are all going to be solid counters to it. It just completely takes it out. It only got 400 damage. Not a big deal. If you time it just right, usually it can be 100 damage if you can predict where it is. If you mispredict, it's going to be a lot more damage. Fisherman's kind of an interesting one. He's a little bit different. If you put him where it spawns, at least he'll be able to kind of tank for the goblins, but he still kind of dies. That's 900 damage. If you do place the Fisherman on the side, it's going to hook no matter where. And that slowing effect is really, really important for just reducing that second goblin from spawning, so it does defend very well for the most part. Knight's going to be a really good counter too, just like the Giant Skeleton. You do have to wait until you see where it spawns, because the Knight does one-shot the goblins. Still 800 damage. Range units, let's say even a graveyard counter with archers, it's going to take out the first goblin, but all those other ones that spawn, it's still going to be 800 damage to your Princess Tower. So if I put down the Musketeer and it targets onto the Goblin Drill, it's tanking for that one Goblin that's getting stabs down. And it's going to be 1,000 damage. Whereas if I wait for the drill to spawn up and delay that attack so my Musketeer takes out the first Goblin, it's going to reduce the damage taken by a little bit. If you do want to stop the drill, place down the archers a little bit later and then the Ice Golem in front, or any other tank like a Knight, whatever, just so that it can tank for all of that. It's 5 elixir for 4. Not a big deal. 200 damage versus the 1,000 damage. Big difference. Tank and rangers that can take it out are really, really good. So I like the Rascals just because they target the goblins and it tanks for everything else. But if they spawn in the front, your Rascals will be able to just tank most of it. 100 damage. That's going to be one of the best defenses. So with that in mind, always wait for the Goblin Drill. If they put it in the back, just put down a Knight, a tank, whatever, and it's going to stop everything. The only damage in the Princess Tower was the spawn damage. With that being said, the front placement's going to be one of the most popular placements. So if you do a prediction on top of there, that Knight will be able to tank all of the goblins and stop all of the damage, well, most of it. It's safer to wait and react to the drill if it's placed on the side or the bottom. You can completely stop 90% of the damage. If you know it's going to be in the front, then you're going to want to predict it in the front. Bats are surprisingly really good at this. It doesn't hit air. It takes out the goblins. 500 damage, unless they have zap. Then in that case, minions will survive the zap and they'll be able to take out the first. Taking out that first goblin is really, really important. 500 damage versus losing your Princess Tower. Splashers like Baby Dragon are going to be pretty decent, but not completely decent. You're going to need a tank in the front like an Ice Golem. Otherwise, it's still going to get like 700 damage. If you do preemptively put down Skeleton Dragons, it's kind of a win-win. They deal enough to take out the Goblin, and that's 400 damage. It's one of the better counters for air splashers. This is where it gets a little juicier. Goblins do a decent job at taking it out. You just have to wait for it to spawn, place it on top, takes out the first stabby Goblin, tanks for some of that, and prevents 700 damage for 2 elixir. That's okay. Goblin Gang is going to do a really good job for this too. You place it on top, takes out the goblins, and the spear goblins kind of help take it out. It's about 500, 600 damage. If you're super confident your opponent's going to place it in the front, after it swerves to the left, I know I can preemptively place down my goblins. They do get knocked back, but they do tank for a lot more damage. Predicting it is going to be super important for preventing a lot more damage. 300 versus the 600. But let's say you predict it wrong. Oh, and they place it in the back. That is pain. That is 1 billion damage to your Princess Tower. The prediction Goblin Gang is great and all, but you cannot predict with a Skarmy. With that 2-tile damage radius, it just wipes out all the skeletons. And they're just going to stab the heck out of the tower. This card is so strong, and I love it. Skarmy is actually a really good counter for it if they don't have Zap. But that was still 2,000 damage to your tower. So you cannot preemptively place down the Skarmy. But if you place it down where you see it spawns, this is the best card to react to it. 200 damage. I'll take that over 2,000 damage. Swarm type troops are going to be one of the better counters to it. I'm going to put down Barbarian wherever I see it spawn. And because I put the Barbarian a little bit to the right, the Stab Goblin still got 700 damage to the tower. Let's try and surround it a little bit better this time. Takes out the first Stab Goblin. That's 400 damage. Let's put Barbarians preemptively in the back. Once we know that it swerves to the left, this is a more realistic counter, and that prevents more than 200 damage. So once you know it swerves, you can put down units in the back, and that's going to prevent a lot more damage to your tower, and it's going to defend against all areas. Completely stops it if it's a back placement. Right as it swerves to the left, I'm going to put down the Goblin Gang, and that is going to stop it. Even when they spawn in the back, your Skarmy still can stop that. It's a relatively safe placement to just put all of your swarm troops in the back. So I can see it swerving to the left. The royal recruits are a little bit slower, but because there's so many of them, they can stop a lot. But that's 7 elixir. Those were the more advanced counters. Wizard, he's a splash. He one-shots the goblins. You don't even need to think of the placement. He's going to take out most of the goblins, and it gets 400 damage. But notice how I placed down my wizard a little bit too early that time. So when the goblin spawned, it survived that first fireball attack. That's the difference between 100 and 400 damage on your Princess Tower. If you watch my verse all video, you'll know that the bomber's the best counter to this. For 2 elixir, it's a win-win. But I did put down the bomber a little bit earlier, so that's 300 damage. If you just wait until it reaches the bridge, that's perfect timing to take out the first goblin before it even spawns. Just completely taking it out. 200 damage. That's it for 2 elixir. Executioner's kind of an iffy one for this, just because it does 2-shot the goblins. That was perfect timing for 200 damage. If you do put down the Executioner a little bit too late, the timing is going to be a little weird, and that's going to be 400 damage to your tower. Bowler just completely wrecks this. Just completely destroys the goblins' hopes and dreams. This is the absolute counter to this. It only deals 21 damage to the Princess Tower. Mega Knight's an easy one. You just have to reactively put it down wherever it is, and it'll get a couple hundred damage, and then you can counterattack now. So with all that in mind, if you know they only have a knight or a giant skeleton to counter it, put it in the front. If they have a wizard or something else, put it on the side. If they have swarmies, do not put it in the back. You could put it on the side as well. It's a bit more riskier, but it's a little bit easier to defend as well. Electro Wizard is a multi-targeter, and it does have that spawn zap, but I don't like using Electro Wizard just because it spawns on top and it nearly dies. It does prevent 300 damage, but it's nearly dead now. Magic Archer is not going to be a really good counter with it unless there's an Ice Golem. What's even worse is if you put down your Magic Archer and it doesn't pierce that goblin because of the way they placed it, that's a lot of damage to your tower. With Magic Archer or any other range units, you need an Ice Golem, a Knight, a Valkyrie, something else. Last but not least, we have spells, and you can't zap it until after the goblins spawn from the death damage. Earthquake does take out the goblin drill very, very well because it is a building, but it's not going to take care of the goblins completely. And those goblins that spawn are still going to deal a lot of damage to your tower. Log and Barbarian Barrel are going to be one of the few spells that are going to be able to counter this properly. You have to wait until after the second goblin spawns to take out the building and that. But if you do it a little too early, it's not going to take out the goblins. That decay timer is very deceiving. So to summarize, it's really hard to counter, but there are cards that can counter it. With the proper timing, the bomber is going to stop most of it. But the reality is you're going to need 2 cards, one in the back and just one to tank. One of the cheaper, safer options would be, let's say, Bomber, and then you put Skeletons on top of there, and that stops most of it. Swarmies, like Goblin Gang in the back, that's going to stop 100% of the Goblin damage. Bowler, nothing's going to get through. This is a foolproof counter to this. Archers are pretty decent too. You're going to have to put it down and then preemptively react with some tank in the front. And Ice Golem's a pretty good one, and that's going to stop most of it. The Log is going to be a very good card to pair with this, just so that it takes out most of the Goblins as well. Basically a tank in a range or a splasher or a spell like Snowball or the Log, plus something in the front to tank for it like an Ice Golem or even Skeletons, and that's good. Generally, these cards are going to be pretty safe to counter it. This looks like a very spell cycle meta if this card is going to be dominant. Hope you all enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. Thanks for using code OJ. See y'all next time.